Bonjour et bienvenue encore dans cette nouvelle leçon. Cette fois-ci, nous allons parler du pluriel des noms. Nous allons parler du pluriel des noms simples. Il y a les noms simples et il y a les composés, les noms composés. Aujourd'hui, nous allons parler des noms simples seulement. In this lesson, we'll be talking about the plural of nouns. We have simple nouns and compound nouns, but in this lesson, we will focus only on simple nouns. So just like in English, when we talk about the plural of noun, we add s to a singular noun, and that turns it into the plural. That's the general sense. Generally, that's what you do to put a noun in a plural. You just add s to it. So for example, letter. Letter in French is lettre. Une lettre. In a plural, we'll say des lettres. So une lettre becomes des lettres in a plural. So as you may have noticed, the S, the final S there is not pronounced at all. That S at the end is not pronounced at all. So the only way we can tell is by the determinants or articles that are used before it. So une, once you hear une, you know that's a singular. So une lettre, that's a singular. And then des lettres, once you hear des, that tells you that we're talking about a plural noun. Another example will be un papier, des papiers. Un papier, des papiers. Un homme, des hommes. Un homme, des hommes. Un ordinateur, des ordinateurs. Un ordinateur, des ordinateurs. So that's the general case. You find a noun in French, you add s to it, that becomes plural. That's the general case. Now, let's go to specific cases now. The category that we're going to have a look at now are those that end in S, X, or Z. Those that end in S, X, or Z. Now, normally in English, we will add ES in these cases, but in French, these remain unchanged. They are not changed at all. So how then do we know that these are in a plural? The same sense. We get that understanding that they're in a plural by means of the determinants that are used before them. So if it ends in S, don't add ES like in English. If it ends in X, don't add EX like in English. If it ends in Z, don't add ES like in English. Just leave it as it is. Now, what are some of those nouns that end in S or X or Z in French? We have un bus. Un bus. Des bus. So the same sound of bus, bus, bus in a singular, bus in a plural. The only difference is that we have the article un and then the other article des. So un bus, des bus. So as you can see, bus ends in S. In a plural, it still ends in S. There is no change at all. A second case would be une croix, des croix. So une croix, des croix. So you already croix, une croix ends in X. Des croix ends in X. No ES like in English. So leave it as it is. That's it. We have another example which is un nez. Un nez becomes des nez in a plural. Des nez, no change in the spelling. It's exactly the same. And finally we have un prix. Un prix becomes des prix in the plural. So we want to talk about more than one price. We want to say prices in French. We say des prix. Same thing because it ends in X. It stays as it is. Now our next category has to do with the nouns that end in al. A-L, al. So if you find a noun, generally if you find a noun ending in al in French, in a plural, that noun will end in aux. So you keep the A, but the L disappears and is replaced by ux. So one common example will be un journal. Un journal becomes des journaux. Un journal, des journaux. So as you can see, un journal in the singular, des journaux. So even the sound changes in the plural from journal to journaux. Let's have a look at other examples. Another common example is un animal. Un animal, des animaux. Un animal, des animaux. Un cheval, des chevaux. Un cheval, des chevaux. Un bocal, des bocaux. Un bocal, des bocaux. Now let's go into the exceptions, because where we say generally, then we fall into the exceptions as well. So we say generally, the noun ends in al. The plural will be found by adding ux and removing the l and just adding ux. So there are a few exceptions. Now let's have a look at those exceptions. Now, chacal. So you may be tempted to say the chacal, because we say when a noun ends in al, the plural is in o, so the chacal, but that's not correct. In French, the chacal, un chacal becomes the chacal. So you just have to remember this one. Un chacal, you know the animal, un chacal becomes the chacal. Another example will be un carnival. Un carnival becomes the carnival, not the carnival, no. Un festival becomes the festival, not the festival. If you make that mistake, just correct yourself, or other people that you're talking to may correct you. French people may correct you by saying, oh, excusez-moi, monsieur, ce ne sont pas des carnivaux, mais ce sont des carnivals. Ce ne sont pas des festivals, mais ce sont des festivals. We have un bal becomes the bal. Un bal becomes the bal. Un récital becomes the récital. Un récital becomes the récital. Un régal becomes the régal. Un régal, the régal. So as that you know what I was saying in French is, excuse me, sir. We don't say festival. We don't say festival, we say festival. That's what I was saying in French. Non, monsieur, ce ne sont pas des festivals, mais ce sont des festivals. So just remember that. So then we have another group. In this group, we're talking about nouns that end in EAU, nouns that end in EU, or nouns that end in AU. So we have nouns ending in EAU, AU, and EU. Now with these ones, you just add X. Generally there. You add X, that will put it into the plural. You add S to the singular, that puts it into the plural. Now let's have a look at a few examples. Un réseau becomes des réseaux. So un réseau with our X, in the plural, we have the réseau. Un couteau becomes the couteau with X at the end. That's the plural. Un tuyau becomes the tuyau. X at the end. Un feu becomes the feu. X at the end as well. So that's how you form the plural of nouns ending in EAU, EU, or AU. But there are a few exceptions here as well. Let's have a look at those exceptions. The first exception in this category would be pneu. Un pneu, the pneu. Now, pneu takes S. Now, you may have already noticed the distinction in the pronunciation of this word. Now, in French, words that end in PN, you pronounce the P like in English, P, pneu, pneu. Whereas in English, we forget about the P and focus on the N, like in pneumonia. In French, we say la pneumonie. It's a bit funny, but that's not the topic for today. So let's just focus on this. So pneu, un pneu becomes des pneus, S at the end. Un bleu becomes des bleus, S at the end instead of X. Un sarrau becomes des sarraux, S at the end instead of X. Un sarrau, des sarraux. Un landau, des landaux, S at the end. So remember these exceptions as we go. Our next group are those nouns that end in OU. OU. Now, nouns that end in OU usually form the plural by just adding S to the noun. But there are some nouns, so let's have a look at some of them first. So for example, we have un trou. Un trou becomes des trous. We add S to it. Un sou becomes des sous. You just add S. Now let's have a look at the exceptions. Now, so normally we add S to nouns ending in OU to form the plural. But there are a few where we have to add X instead of S. X instead of S. Now let's have a look at a few in that category. We have un genou becomes des genoux. X at the end instead of S. Un genou, des genoux. Un caillou, des cailloux. Un caillou, des cailloux. Un joujou, des joujoux. Un joujou, des joujoux. Un chou, des choux. Un chou, des choux. Un pou, des poux. Un pou, des poux. Un hibou, des hiboux. Un hibou, des hiboux. Now, you may have already noticed I didn't say un hibou. I didn't do a liaison because this word hibou starts with a kind of H we call aspirated H. And in French, when you have an aspirated H, you don't do liaison, you don't do elision. That's why I didn't say un hibou, des hiboux. That's why I said un hibou, des hiboux. So you keep them apart. And then the last but not the least in this category, un bijou, des bijoux. Un bijou, des bijoux. I just thought of one irregular plural in French that I think you should know. It has to do with the eye. So an eye in French is called un œil. Un œil, but in a plural, it's pronounced des yeux. Un œil, des yeux. Un œil, des yeux. Now let's have a look at a few examples to see whether you can guess the plural. The first one is un hôpital. So we want to say hospitals in French, or two hospitals. What would that be? So in French, two is deux. Two is deux. So how do we say two hospitals in French? Hospital ends in AL. So what would the plural be? 3 seconds. Now the plural would be des hôpitaux. Deux hôpitaux. The plural will be deux hôpitaux. Deux hôpitaux. That's it. Second test example would be un festival. What's the plural? So we want to say two festivals. Two in French is deux. So deux. Did you say deux festivals? Is that what you said? That's not correct. Remember, festival is one of the exceptions in the AL category. So we say des festivals, not des festivals. Remember that, one of the exceptions. So it will be deux festivals, not deux festivals. Okay? And then we have drapeau. Un drapeau in the plural becomes des what? The drapeau, but how do you spell it? Does it end in an X or an S? With drapeau, it falls in the general category, so we just add X. Remember, for those nouns that end in EAU or EU or AU, we just add X in the general category. So drapeau doesn't fall within the exception, so we just add X. So we have the drapeau, X at the end, the drapeau. And then our next one is un bras. Un bras is one of the categories that already ends in S. Remember the category where the noun ends in either S, X, or Z. Remember what you have to do. So in the plural, what would we say? Is it de bras, same spelling, or do we add ES or something else? 3 seconds. Is de bras, same spelling as the singular, because it already ends in S. And we said before, if it already ends in S, or X, or Z, you leave as is. So de bras. Our final example for the day will be une maison. In the plural, what would that be? Now, maison is a general noun. It's nothing special. What would that be? 3 seconds. Des maisons. Just add S to it. So as you can see, as we went through everything today, we have the general category and we have the specific categories where you have to follow the rules. Now, this may be very, very difficult for a starter. The more you use these words, the more you get used to the plurals. Now, it's not a problem if you make a mistake. You can always learn from your mistakes. So that's very simple. That's very normal. That's part of the learning process. So don't be afraid to make mistakes in French. That's how you learn. Good day. Thanks for watching. Au revoir et à bientôt.